At more than 80,000 acres, it's one of the world's largest urban parks. It includes dozens of notable sites, more than 130 miles of trails, an abundance of natural, cultural, and scenic resources, and great views of a very famous bridge. The Golden Gate National Recreation Area, created by an act of Congress in 1972, annually greets more than 16 million people, including bikers, hikers, joggers, birders, nature lovers, tourists, and others. The responsibility for making all this nature look natural and publicly accessible lies with the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy and the Presidio Trust, working with the National Park Service. Together they have raised tens of millions of dollars to fund hundreds of projects within the GGNRA and specifically the Presidio, which was originally operated as a military facility but closed in 1994. Activity at the GGNRA and Presidio since 1996 includes conservation efforts, the restoration of Crissy Field, the revitalization of Fort Baker and Cavallo Point, improvements at park sites including Land's End, the Muir Woods Boardwalk, the Golden Gate Bridge Plaza, the California Coastal Trail, and Alcatraz Gardens, all of which leverage taxpayer dollars to attract considerable private support to the park. Over the years, many Bay Area landscape architects, planners, architects, engineers, naturalists, horticulturists, and others have worked on projects large and small that collectively shaped the park. Here are their stories.
Well, the cultural landscape of Golden Gate National Recreation Area really, I think, starts at a more basic level of just landscape in general, whether it be natural or cultural. I think the natural beauty of the Bay Area, the harbor that initially brought people to settle in San Francisco, eventually became the context for why people stayed. And it wasn't just about the commerce and the port, but it was about the beauty of the area and the quality of life. That ultimately we have, if you look offshore from our parklands, you see the open space of the Pacific Ocean. It's almost like a wilderness out there. And then if you look to the other side and you see San Francisco Bay, which was preserved. People made choices here 40 years ago, 50 years ago, not to fill the bay in. So essentially you have great open space in the middle of the San Francisco metropolis that's not developed. So it's a wonderful context of natural and cultural resources and amenities there that we benefit from. And ultimately it's capped, I think, by the fact that we have a national park that was designated in our midst to preserve this spectacular coastline.
I think for me, and I've sort of been preaching this point for a long time, and I'm not sure it's gotten through to a lot of people. It's the big picture. The Golden Gate is a international landmark, geographical landmark, that's sort of been overshadowed by the bridge. When you say Golden Gate, everyone thinks you're talking about the bridge. But it's actually the entrance to one of the world's great harbors, which has tremendous historical significance over a 200-year period, at least 200 years. It also has tremendous natural resource values. 16 California rivers drain out through the Golden Gate. It's a really powerful, powerful place. So to me, the cultural landscape there is a broad significance more than looking at ranch house buildings or military architecture.
They had just come off a very bad experience at Yosemite where they had proposed some changes to Yosemite that were very poorly received by the public. And you know, a lot of the public that represents places like Yosemite is from the Bay Area. I mean, this is the hotbed of people who are interested in the environment. And they were kind of concerned about how can they do a plan for a park right in the middle of this hotbed of people who are interested. And I said, well, you know, we've got to go out to the people and make this a transparent process. This has got to be a people up process, not a Park Service down process. And Superintendent Whalen and Doug Nato were very, very interested in that and very creative in how they adapted to that. So upon our suggestion, we went into a series of workshops. And the workshops were originally planned to involve the public in the planning of the GGNRA.
Well, in working with cultural landscapes, it's a fun assignment. It's fun because there's so much to discover and explore. There's no cookie-cutter answer to the best solution for improvement or stewardship or restoration. So what I've learned is the joy of working with people of multi-disciplines to really approach a design challenge or issue or opportunity and in a very iterative way bring out the best. Working not only with professional staff, but also with the public that love the place and have their own relationship with it and who we will depend on to care for it into the future.
One of the things that I find particularly unique about the cultural landscapes in the GGNRA is that they not only preserve important aspects of our human history, they've developed interesting ecologies. I sometimes talk about them as incidental ecologies or accidental ecologies. So you go to a place like Alcatraz, which I worked on at one point in my career for the Parks Conservancy, and you can see how the wildlife has reanimated the park, reanimated the island in reaction to the cultural interventions that were made in the site. In the Presidio, there's a forest that was planted in the 1880s and 1890s that is the largest cultural resource in the park that's developed really rich natural resources as well and created this sort of synthetic ecological system that pervades the entire landscape. And it's really had a huge impact on my thinking about what nature is and how we manage biodiversity in the urban environment. So I would say the rich mosaic of landscapes has had a fundamental role in shaping my intellectual approach to the landscape more largely. So it's really important. And I think, frankly, it's a landscape that has a lot of important lessons that it can communicate to the broader design profession and to the planet at large about some of the challenges we face in the 21st century.
Having grown up here in the Bay Area, I grew up looking at these hills, the Presidio and Land's End and the Marin Headlands. It's sort of like the backdrop to my day-to-day growing up. And the fact that this open space is nearby gave us a feeling of not really wilderness, but an unexplored area that gave an openness to our lives and a sense of adventure. As kids, we tromped the hills and explored bunkers and hiked beaches where we probably shouldn't have been. But on a broader sense, the cultural landscape of GGNRA, it's a vestige. It's a little bit of a reminder of what these lands looked like before Europeans got here. Tremendously impacted, of course, but it's a hint. It's a vestige. And being a historian and looking at how these lands through photographs have changed over time, that's how we're losing a lot of the vistas, a lot of the landforms. And working with the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy, to rehabilitate and bring back a sense of some of those lost landscapes has really been rewarding. It's a part of preserving not only the Bay Area heritage, but in a way my own family heritage.
Well, the cultural landscape in a national park is distinct maybe from the landscapes that landscape architects are usually dealing with. In many cases, landscape architects are brought to sites that may have no image or identity and seek to create through their designs both that image and identity and beauty and usefulness as well. In the park, what we're really seeking to do in the landscape is beautify it but not embellish it. The cultural landscape, at the end of the day, when our designs are implemented, the cultural landscape and history has to shine through. And so we're looking for designs that can help make that history distinct and yet be useful and beautiful as well in a park environment. So as a landscape architect, I'm always interested in how to preserve that cultural landscape while adding new and different contemporary improvements or embellishments to the area.
I love seeing man-made features in a spectacular environment like we have here at the Golden Gate National Park, where there are military, ancient military installations, as well as remnants of the agricultural communities that used to occupy a lot of parklands. So in these new projects that we're doing, it's an interesting challenge to preserve the historic elements in the landscape while creating new features that are really about bringing visitors in to understand the history of the site and know what this place was before it became a national park.
You know, first we take a look at the landscape and we analyze it. We do research and try to determine both integrity and significance. And you know, usually after you go through that exercise, you know, you have a pretty clear direction. But every once in a while we have a project that overlaps and has both significance and integrity. And we have an example of that on the main post with the Upper Funston houses, the officers' houses, which date from 1863, some of our oldest military architecture on the West Coast. And they happen to sit right on top of, or very close to, Spanish and Mexican colonial foundations for the original El Presidio.
When I first got involved with the Crissy Field project, one of the things that struck me was this sense of generosity amongst all the people that were contributing to that project. The sense that everybody was working on a really important mission to do something that would make the community a better place. Not just the Bay Area community, but even really everyone was very aware that this was going to be a place that was going to be a real destination for visitors and residents alike. And I always felt a real sense of gratification in the feeling that we were really on the good guys team. It was really a project that was going to be something fantastic for the future, and you really felt like you were doing something important, really important work for your community.
It's the largest single park area in the city of San Francisco. It's 400 acres more than Golden Gate Park. So there's no spot in the city that has more cultural resources. I responded by trying to get rid of some of the elements which were adversely affecting it. Well, the low viaduct, which was the first item I, going back 25 years, wanted to get rid of, was demolished in 59 hours, which was pretty amazing. It's over 3,000 feet long. I think the historic buildings are going to stand out a lot better because the low viaduct, which was right in front of the main post, was the largest structure in the entire Presidio, so that's already gone. So what you're going to see to those historic buildings is a foreground of green space, so it's going to be a fantastic improvement. In fact, it'll be almost like the highway disappeared.
As the landscape architects, we really are the stewards. We're the stewards of design more than anything else. When we sit around the table, there are many other factors being considered. And when we present a series of design solutions, we really vet those. And I think at the end, we don't want them so diluted, so kind of torn apart by different interests that we lose the sense of coherence. So we really are design stewards, and that's with, a small d. It's not about signature design. It's not about big design. We're kind of celebrating nuance and subtlety in the cultural landscape.
Our work began with the Presidio Health Services Complex. That was a historic building and required an evaluation of the landscape and its history over time, the cultural landscape specifically. This meant that we went back to primary resources, which gave us an incredible introduction into that landscape and the history of that landscape. Much of that work had been done for the general management plan, and the Presidio and the national parks obviously have a great sense of that history. They have many historians working on it. But being able to go to the primary resources was fascinating.
As a designer, I think what's terrific about having the cultural landscape here and the layers of history is that it gives you so much to work with in terms of trying to bring elements of that history up to being visible by users today. How can you add to it? How can you reveal some of what's in the past? How can you add your own layer of present that will at some point become future history?
And I came at a fortunate time when a lot of the decisions about what cultural landscapes were in the park and whether we should be preserving them or not has been decided. And so a lot of what I'm involved with now is figuring out how to share those spaces, how to interpret them, how to bring people into them, how to keep them relevant, how to tell the old stories, but allow them to develop new stories. And oftentimes it's the tension between those two, between telling the old stories and letting them respond to our more current and day-to-day needs, that's really the challenge of landscape architects.
And so we worked with landscape architects to respond to the very unique and very spectacular place along the edge of the GGNRA at Land's End. And one of the more remarkable experiences there was really the uncovering through working with the Park Service, the Parks Conservancy, the uncovering of the rich stories that existed there at, from Sutro Baths to the Ohlone to the Cliff House and its many iterations to Mary Way, just the opportunity to tell the rich stories not only of Land's End as a land piece at the edge of our continent, but the many, many layers that have kind of built up over time.
And I think the success we've had has been in part because of this challenge that we've set for each of the landscape architects that we've worked with, that they have to respect the history, they have to accommodate new uses, and it creates a dynamic that's quite, that's often missing in other projects. And I think we've had a lot of success, and people appreciate what we've done because they see that that we've achieved a balance between the new and the old. But it's always very, very firmly grounded in a respect for the past and an understanding of the history of the place. And that's what we bring to it. That's what we specialize in at GGNRA and at the Presidio.
Some of the cultural things, some of the historic things that you want to try to preserve, it's always interesting. Are we going to preserve this? Are we going to preserve that item? Sometimes we want to preserve something. There were a lot of historic plants around a lot of the buildings, but they didn't survive because we had lead-based paint and it dripped down, and we'd have to get rid of the soil, and we lost a lot of the plants. Other times there'd be maybe an officer's wife had grown an avocado seed, put it in the water and then planted it in a 2-foot strip next to the house, and now it's a problem just because it's too close, and maybe it's historic, but it has to go. Some of those kinds of things are unfortunate, but that's part of trying to bring it up to date and also preserve the history.
There are many exceptional people working for the Park Service. I think that my first large encounter with GGNRA was at a place called Sutro Baths, and we were involved in the master planning for the future of Sutro Baths. The Sutro Historic District, essentially a 100-acre site around Sutro Baths. And there were probably 3 key people, all of whom are retired. 2 of whom are retired, one is no longer alive. That would be Nick Weeks, Doug Nadeau, and Brian O'Neill. They were adventuresome. They knew about cultural landscapes. They knew about the history of the place. They also became, through dialogue, they also became very interested in evolving the place for contemporary use. And the thinking and the proposals we were able to put forward there in the master plan, I think surprised them, certainly surprised me in terms of how flexible and fluid the National Park Service could be. And I think that all of us got to a larger idea about place than any of us would have on our own. So it's a very exciting experience.
I think one of the projects that probably recently we just completed, which was the cemetery overlook. It overlooks the National Cemetery. You know, we have a couple veterans in the company, and that was a project that really struck home with everyone on my side, because I think it was really well executed, and it was amazing to watch the opening ceremonies and to get to meet the people that you know, had relatives that were interred, and to go through the process and kind of learn about that piece of history, which kind of, to some extent, gets kind of overlooked in San Francisco. It's not something people really are commonly aware of.
The spot is, you really have to stumble upon it. It's, you know, it's off the beaten track. It's not really along a major road. So it's kind of a surprise, which is, you know, what makes it so special. And it's a place for quiet contemplation, you know, where you can reflect on the meaning of service and sacrifice. You know, it's intimate, so a visitor can just, you know, come by himself and, you know, just sit there quietly and, you know, enjoy the view and absorb it all in.
And I think that in a way, the Golden Gate Bridge is a great example of that. It's a great example of a project that is an engineering feat and really speaks to the moment in which it was built and designed, but it's enduring and feels linked to the larger landscape.
It was very important for us, especially on the Golden Gate Bridge, that we created a place that didn't compete with the icon that it sits in front of. It's really through subtle means of interpreting the landscape of the bridge itself that we actually subtly layer that into the landscape.
For me, the work here tends to be constructed and designed in a way that is meant to last and is meant to blend in over time, and the projects tend to look better as time goes on versus other projects we've done for other cities where, you know, they will try and add a bunch of elements that become the focal point, whereas here it's the focal point is the natural setting.
Well, actually, it was the cultural landscape of the GGNP was a gift for someone like myself as part of the design process. It's a unwritten book that you go out on the landscape, and it really dictates your design of your trail systems in a way that you can't do on paper in an office. You go out and experience, you have control points from different cultural resources throughout the area to connect your trails to give the people and the public and the trail users an experience unlike they wouldn't have ordinarily, to immerse them within that landscape.
Back when the ideas of this landscape started to roll, you know, I sort of see maybe a 15 to 20-year period of significance where there were certainly personalities, there was the environmental movement, there was, you know, a desire to develop land, there was the decommissioning of the bases and the surplus, and all of that came together. And because there were people with a tremendous amount of will, that moment, that confluence of those events in history made a difference. And today, that same passion that I was talking about, being so impressed by, still exists. And that's what's allowed this landscape, I think, to flourish and be preserved in so many ways.
And our continued work ever since then with the Conservancy and the Park Service and the Trust on Crissy Field and in the Presidio has continually brought that same sense of gratification, and it's really the reason why we set up our firm in San Francisco and have been focusing on this type of local work. It has all come from our initial experience working on Crissy Field with the Conservancy primarily.
Working at Land's End with the Parks Conservancy and the Park Service was really just a spectacular experience. I have, in the years of working with different institutions, I've never worked with a group of people who truly lived and breathed a notion of collaboration like the Conservancy and the Park Service did.
Absolutely. I think the best thing was working with the Parks Conservancy. They're like a big family, and they came to us with big welcoming arms, and we just dove right in. I mean, it was a real collaboration between the design talent and the people at the Conservancy, right from the top to the bottom. It was really a huge participatory experience that really brought out the richness of the project. It wasn't about all about roadblocks or how we can't do things. It was about how do we make solutions happen? How do we actually get over these hurdles and make it actually better? And I think in some ways, even at Land's End, that was really the case.
The depth of passion for this landscape, all over the place, whether it was a neighbor or a benefactor or somebody from the Park Service or the Golden Gate National Recreation Area or the Trust, people cared so deeply. And that's profound. That really is profound, that we care.
No, it's been incredible. I mean, one of the weird anomalies about working in the Presidio is that it's a historic site with ecological values. It's a national park. But it's a place that is also a community, because the buildings are inhabited and need to be inhabited to generate the revenue we need to support the park. And so it needs to be remade as a national park and as a place that is inhabited by people as a community. And so we have this really amazing challenge of preserving the qualities that it was protected for, and at the same time transforming it so that it can become a 21st century community. And that's the challenge that we are always facing in our work, and these landscape architects have played a huge role in guiding that transformation as a result. So it's been really a really interesting place to work. Anyway, well, thank you.